Antonín Dvořák is widely considered one of the most versatile composers. His work over the years makes him a central figure in the Romantic era, as it is filled with aspects of nationalism, emotion, folk music, and especially melodic richness.
The famous Johann Brahms once said, "It would be wonderful if the major ideas that occur to me were like the ones that occurred to Dvořák simply in passing."
At the center of his career was his love for the modern-day Czech Republic, and this was a prime example of a Romantic-era nationalist. Being known as the predecessor of Czech composer Bedřich Smetana, the composer of the Moldau, Dvořák was able to reach a much more international audience with his both adaptable and modern style. Although Dvořák traveled around the world, his love for Prague always made him return, even in his final days.
To simplify things, we will split Dvořák's life into 3 parts. 1. Rising fame in Prague, 2. Time in America, and 3. Return to Prague.
Dvořák was born in 1841 in Nelehozev, Bohemia, and this was just 18 kilometers north of the city of Prague, but it also lay on the Vltava River. He was exposed to music at quite an early age, with his father, František Dvořák, playing the zither and being very keen on music. Now this provided an atmosphere where his musical talents could blossom. His father was a butcher by trade, but after Dvořák was almost dragged and drowned in a lake by some cattle, he realized that his talents just lay elsewhere. Dvořák learned the violin at age 6 and played in a village band and church for a good portion of his childhood. His father recognized his talent and knew that learning German was the next step in advancing his musical career. When Dvořák turned 13, he moved with his German-speaking uncle, Antonín Stenek, where he also got lessons from a family friend by the name of Antonín Lehmann.
He learned German, the piano, the organ, and continued his violin lessons under Lehmann, completing his first composition at the age of 14, the Forget-Me-Not polka. He then decided it was time to further his career, and he moved to the capital city, Prague.
Dvořák spent his first years at what is known as the organ school in Prague, but later suffered from poverty and began teaching as well as composing more pieces. His compositions during this period, such as his C minor symphony, were never performed for at least 10 years, with some waiting over a century to be first premiered. He found himself struggling to even purchase paper at this point in time, but kept on composing nonetheless. After marrying Anna Surmakova, something big ended up occurring. Dvořák ended up winning the prestigious Austrian State Prize in 1874, 76, and 77 after sending in a mountain of his compositions. This left Johannes Brahms, who was a member of the committee, absolutely shaken, as it was not just a lot of music, but it was great quality as well. Until the end of his life, Brahms was a great friend of Dvořák, and Brahms even proofread Dvořák's work during his free time. Now, this friendship lasted all the way until Brahms' death, in which Brahms even offered Dvořák his entire wealth right before he passed away. For the next 15 years, Dvořák composed some of his most famous works, focusing on developing a Czech identity in his music. His Moravian duets, Czech suites, and Slavonic dances are examples. His Slavonic dances, turning folk-like idioms into concert masterworks, were the most successful, selling sheet music to people like hotcakes and selling out all in a single day. Dvořák started to be known around the world, and this included countries such as England, Germany, and even Russia. Tchaikovsky actually invited Dvořák to go ahead and compose one of his pieces in Russia, and this got Dvořák's name spreading around the world. Now, another very famous composition during this time was a serenade for strings, which some of the grade 12s may recognize. Dvořák had abundant melodic inspiration, and this caused him to create classics in a diverse range of different musical genres. However, the ordering of Dvořák's work is often misleading. That's because his publishers gave him higher opus numbers, and that's just to make him seem more accomplished and experienced. Many of his partially finished compositions were later just discovered after his death as well.
Dvořák's most recognizable pieces today are his 9 symphonies, only 5 of which were published during his lifetime. His most famous symphony is the New World Symphony in E minor, which he composed during his time in New York. This symphony was reportedly played by astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin as they first stepped onto the moon in 1969. It was in America that he also composed some of his most famous humoresques and his string quartet in F. In around 1894, he composed his popular cello concerto in B minor, which he premiered in London, England 2 years later. Much as he used to check folk idioms in his earlier works, Dvořák aimed to discover American music and engage in it by coming to New York. He also loved to travel, and he moved to America with his family in 1892. His nationalist reputation attracted the founder of the National Conservatory of Music in America to hire him as a director. Dvořák was a huge advocate for African American music and declared that the future of America must be founded upon these melodies. Dvořák faced harsh criticism for his views due to prevalent racial segregation, but much to America's surprise, he chose a black student to be his assistant. This student, Harry Burleigh, sang spirituals to Dvořák such as Go Down Moses, a melody Dvořák said rivaled those of Beethoven. Where most Americans ignored it, Dvořák meticulously wove these melodies into his New World Symphony, most notably the second movement, Largo. This particular movement sounded so much like a spiritual that many individuals reportedly assumed that the song was from a church hymn book when they first heard it.
Ultimately, despite only spending a couple of years in the United States, Dvořák's influence on 20th century music was substantial during this time. By celebrating inclusion in music, he helped bring out the voices of Native American, African American, and ragtime music, which then on became a true identity of what American music actually is.
Both the American and Czech nationalistic qualities are distinct in the symphony, but together they set the stage to use folk music as the basis for an American nationalistic identity. It is almost like Dvořák painted a tonal picture of America while maintaining forms and rhythms of his Czech nationalistic style. His student Brele would go on to become one of the first African-American composers, but Brele also introduced Dvořák to the violinist Will Marion Cook, who would go on to mentor Duke Ellington. Another one of Dvořák's students was Reuben Goldmark, who went on to instruct George Gershwin and Aaron Copland. One of Dvořák's main hobbies was keeping pigeons during the summer months. He had a family friend watch his house as he traveled, and he left a list of instructions so that the pigeons would receive the best care possible. In fact, after one visit to England, the royal family gifted Dvořák 6 pairs of pigeons of distinct breeds that would be of interest to him.
After his contract was over, Dvořák moved back to Prague and mainly focused on composing chamber music and operas. He seemingly left behind his interest in composing symphonies back in America.
At this time, Dvořák was considered a hero in the Czech Republic, as he, alongside Smetana, developed a distinct Czech musical identity. At this time, Brahms invited him to move to Vienna, and having no descendants, he said to Dvořák, "If you need anything, my fortune is at your disposal." Dvořák, loyal to the Czech identity, found it almost impossible to leave Bohemia. Brahms died less than a year later. Dvořák was quite active until the end. Being a director of the Prague Conservatory, he also conducted various works by Brahms, Schubert, and Beethoven. He died in 1904 from influenza, and his legacy has remained ever since.
Dvořák's life was undoubtedly a remarkable journey, marked by his unwavering dedication to incorporating the folk melodies of his homeland into his compositions. This makes him really one of the most significant figures in the Romantic era. While we try to uncover weird things in his life, he was a very professional composer who lived a nice, long life, though he was obsessed with both pigeons and trains. Before we end, we want to leave you with a quote from Dvořák before he died. "If you don't smoke, then you'll never be a composer." And with that, thanks for listening.